Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Parent Chat tonight. I'm not Sherry Gazette, who is usually with you. She is away tonight, taking some self-care time in a place that has a little warmer temperatures. Um, so for tonight, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for joining us and spending this hour learning new ways to support your child. Tonight, we are excited to have Christy Nicholson of Youth Eastside Services back with us, and Randy Nish, also from Youth Eastside Services, will also be joining us tonight. And they'll be talking about a cognitive behavior therapy model that's incredibly useful to help your children work through problems and make decisions. Before we start, I would like to share my screen very quickly. And let you know about the Be the Bridge event that Lake Washington Schools Foundation is having next Thursday. We at Balance in Mind would like to invite you to join us for this luncheon. The luncheon raises money to support programs like Balance in Mind, which provides Parent Chat to you twice a month, as well as a bunch of other programs in schools and for parents. The foundation also supports other programs like Find Your Fit College Guidance and Kids Coming Together, which pairs high school mentors with younger kids. And there's more programs too. So if you would like to join us, register at www.lwsf.org to help us keep these programs part of our community. If you would like to sit with the Balance in Mind team, and we would love to have you, then just put Balance in Mind as your table captain. Thank you so much. And with that, let me turn it over to Christy.
All right, and let's get Randy to turn his video back on. He's masquerading under my name, but maybe Val can change that so that you will be able to kind of get his name in place. So when Randy joins us, Randy is one of the behavioral health support specialists that works on the team that I oversee in the Lake Washington School District, working in the middle schools and in the choice schools, providing behavioral health, which is mental health and substance use prevention and education, as well as mental health group, individual, and other kinds of supports. And Randy is placed at Redmond Middle School. And he is here this evening going to show you kind of in action, working with a student using cognitive behavioral therapy. And what my thought is here for you parents is some time ago, well, fairly often when I've been presenting or been part of Parent Chat, you've heard me talk about how I think we used to want to protect our children, but that in today's world, what we really need to do is equip our children. And so this presentation tonight is really very much about that. And we are using cognitive behavioral therapy, which, like many therapies, sounds like a mouthful, but usually has very simple underpinnings. So if you imagine a triangle and you think that the peak of it, we have thoughts. So this is our thoughts, then we have feelings, and then we have behavior or the action. And so you have these three things, and they are always interacting when we're behaving, when we're working through a situation, when we're making choices. And what I want to say about those, and what I want to stick with you tonight, is that with feelings, you always want to validate feelings. You don't want to argue with feelings. You don't want to dispute them. You don't want to say that's the wrong feeling, that's too much of a feeling. You always want to go for the validation. I see, I understand, I can tell that you are feeling very distressed, very sad, very happy. Did I get that right? Maybe, right? So we're validating feelings. Thoughts you want to explore, and you want to help your child explore, whether little child, I think this works for little children all the way up to young adult and older children, and something definitely we can utilize ourselves, kind of all the things that we're talking about tonight, applying them to kind of ourselves too. So oftentimes we need to figure out, well, what is my thought here? What is my belief that I have and hold? And sometimes we want to kind of challenge that and go, is that the best thought I could have here? Is that the most helpful thought? is that realistic? What's my evidence for that? But I want you as parents to go a little soft on that and think about exploring. What you're really wanting to do is break through any rigidity that your child might have, an attachment to this particular thought about something. Because when we do that, then we really limit the flexibility of what can happen in the feelings and the behavior. So thinking about exploring that thought. What is the thought? What other thoughts might be possible? What's a related thought? You know, what happens when you're thinking that thought? How does it relate to the feelings? Validating the feelings, exploring the thoughts, then behavior. Behavior, you want to look at and help your child look at what are sort of it's evaluative, not judgmental, but evaluative. So what are the positive things that come from that behavior, or could potentially come from that behavior, or did come from that behavior? What are some of the negative things that happen, the not so good things that might happen around that? So it's helping to really look at kind of pros and cons, positive and negative consequences. So I'm going to probably repeat that a little bit down, but right now I want to invite Randy in to kind of share with us an example of a situation that he might have with a student and how he uses this cognitive triangle and the interaction of those three things. Because the one other positive thing, right, Randy, about these three is that you can intervene in any one of those. And some kids, it's easier to kind of enter in and help them work with the thinking part first. Others, it's leading with that validation of the feelings that's going to get you there every time. And for some others, it's more that analysis of kind of the pros and cons of the behavior. And I want to say one other thing, Randy, before you start, which is a lot of you parents are familiar with this kind of idea of flipping the lid, where we have the amygdala, the emotional mind here, and it's usually wrapped by that part of our mind in the front that thinks things through, is kind of calm and even. And as we get upset, well, up go these fingers until the lid is flipped. If your child's lid is flipped, this is not time to do this experiment with the ABC that we're talking about of cognitive behavioral therapy and thoughts, feelings, action. When the lid is flipped, what you do is you do whatever it takes to bring this down so that the lid is closed and your child is calm. And oftentimes if a child is like that, we're kind of like that, or at least like this. So that is no time to be having a conversation, exploring, validating, evaluating. No, these got to come down first. So that's your breathing, that's your calming, that's your going for a walk, that's your listening through a song. It's naming for your child. Whoa, lids are flipped. We got to get these back down. Then we can talk about it later. So with that said, here is Randy. Randy.
Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so I do want to address that last piece, going off what Christy said. Doing cognitive behavioral therapy or working in this cognitive model with kiddos, it does require some introspection into their own thoughts and them looking at their own feelings, which is very, very difficult if we are dysregulated and having these strong emotions. So yeah, learning and knowing your kids' coping skills and what really helps regulate and get that lid down is a really essential first part of this. So that being said, I'd like to just go through an example of what I might see in schools. Generally, I'll get some kiddos who are fairly dysregulated who come to my office. So we'll always do coping skills, and then we'll start with that validation piece of those thoughts that they're having.
And the coping skills, Randy, would be the things like doing the breathing, kind of just settling in their chair. Maybe they need to kind of walk, or what would be some examples of some of those coping skills?
Yeah, so it's an ongoing process figuring out what works best for the individual. Different kiddos respond to different things that help them regulate. Breathing is very effective, whether it be box breathing, visualization breathing. Sensory scanning and other grounding activities are really beneficial. Progressive muscle relaxation, things that really help our mindfulness, help bring us out of our thoughts and understand that association with our bodies. And that really helps kind of calm the mind and help understand our own thoughts and feelings that are happening. So I'd like to go through a quick example that I often see in schools. Very often what I see is when a kiddo is dysregulated from I'll go with a pretty common example of getting a bad grade in an exam. It happens very, very often. So Christy talked about that triangle piece. Let's see if I can get my whole board in here. So what we'll do is, of course, we'll validate the feelings, and then I'll pretty much challenge the kiddo to explore some thoughts about why they might be having this strong emotional reaction to getting a bad grade in an exam. And of course, that is done from an informed perspective and just guiding conversation about thoughts. So one of the thoughts an individual might have is that I'm not smart, and that's why I got a bad grade on the exam. Generally always draw it out so they can work with me through an example. So I'll ask them to elaborate a little bit more on that and try some Socratic techniques. That might be what a more helpful way to think about this might be. Challenge them by asking that. I'll examine some evidence, ask, how did you do on last exam? How are you doing in the class and other classes? And really challenge the narrative that I'm not smart. And then I'll ask, if we say that we're not smart, what kind of feelings that elicit? And generally, I'll get a feeling of anxiety or sadness. And we have that feeling, that behavior that we generally see is being upset or not being able to perform in class. So we have our whole cognitive triangle here. And I think one of the best ways to go about this is finding where we can intervene. So we talk about some ways to challenge this thought and what a more helpful thought can be based on the evidence. And another thought we could incorporate was how we've done other exams, how we've done other classes, or using Socratic techniques, what my friend would say in this situation. And that might elicit the different thought of that I've succeeded in other class before.
Can I ask a clarification on that when you're saying kind of that Socratic method and that
Absolutely.
example of kind of like what might a friend say? So if that's like if I was, the student and I'm thinking my belief, my thought here is that I am just stupid and can't achieve anything, right? And it's like, would it be like, if your friend got a bad grade on the test, what might you say to them? Because I'm kind of thinking it's probably not, you're going to say you're just dumb and that's why, right?
Yep, absolutely. So that generally helps kiddos put themselves in this different perspective, this third-party perspective about, you tell them that about other times they succeeded and other things that they have done to show that they aren't smart or show that they are smart. So that's Socratic questioning that generally works well there. And then we can look at other places we can intervene on the cycle. So when we're feeling anxious, this is another place where coping skills can help. We can intervene in this place. We're feeling anxious. So we have a list of coping skills we can look at and figure out, after validating that anxiety, like, I understand why you might feel anxious about this. What else can we do? What helps us feel not anxious when we are? What has helped to regulate us in previous experiences?
What's helped before, if anything? Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, we'll generally make a list of things that have helped us in this before. And we'll split that list of things that have worked in school and things that have worked at home. So we have a place we can intervene. When we're able to acknowledge that thought, we can intervene by asking Socratic questioning and kind of reframing, restructuring that thought. And we'll also identify supports, individuals in the person's life who are there, they can ask to challenge that thought. So we'll identify Socratic questioning and people they can intervene. We'll write mom, friends. And then here, when when they can acknowledge the anxiety or stress they're feeling, we'll look back at our coping skills that we've discussed. And that can be breathing. It can be that sensory scanning. And then when we are in this dysregulated state, or when we are seeing a maladaptive behavior, this is probably the most difficult place to intervene, but we can figure out some things when we do see this behavior. It might be that we need to remove ourselves from the situation and we need to get somewhere where we can be calm. So we identify all places where we can intervene. So
might the behavior be both being kind of super escalated and argumentative, or might it be, getting so upset in class, throwing their books on the ground or yelling at somebody or getting in a fight, but figuring out, well, what really was kind of bothering you, but behavior is kind of, what are they doing? What are they acting out? Kind of, it's that part, right, that we see. Is that?
Yes, absolutely. So behavior is what we generally observe, and it's when this cycle has run its course. And I talk a lot about in the cycle, if we don't do any of these interventions, in a cycle, we're always going to see that same behavior. So what I'll generally do then is create another cycle with what happens if we are able to intervene in any of these areas. If we're able to restructure when we're having this, what feelings that elicit? If we're able to successfully ask Socratic questions and challenge that narrative that we're not smart, that elicit a sense of feeling good, feeling happy, but then elicits a very different behavior. And we can start at any point with that, truly. So
I'm wondering, like, say, perhaps we start with those kinds of the not smart in this example. And maybe I change that to, well, I was really worried about, my uncle who got in a car accident, and I didn't sleep very well, and I didn't also get very much studying done. So what feelings do I have kind of related to that? Well, maybe I'm disappointed, but it changes a little bit from the kind of hopelessness about I'm never going to be able to do anything good, right? And probably I don't feel quite as explosive. And so, or if we started with that behavior, like you said, I can imagine it's like, well, if I'm feeling kind of like really like this, and I'm about to sort of slam my books on my desk, I could instead take a deep breath, and maybe even raise my hand and say, could I be excused for a moment, or I need to go to the counseling office, or whatever it might be, right? So that I interrupt that behavior. And that if we were working on the feelings, and this I want to kind of underline this for the parents, is that importance about validating the feelings, because it's so important. And if you think about this, if you're feeling really distressed and upset about something, right? First, you want to be validated that you're having this experience and that somebody understands kind of how significant and important it is to you. Like, so I've had a bad day at work. I go home and I'm talking to my spouse or my partner, and I'm just like, oh, that was so embarrassing, and I was so upset, and so on this. And he's like, well, do you think we could talk about kind of how you handled that and how you were thinking about that? And, couldn't you do that differently? And what about this? And what about that? Before they ever say, oh, that sounds so hard and so difficult, the message that we get is that they are not listening to us and kind of how we're feeling and the significance of the experience to us. And we're going to feel angry, defensive. We're going to shut down. We're going to argue. And so we've now just kind of put in a block or a barrier. Whereas if you validate the feelings, so this isn't saying like you think that they're rational, but they're feelings, right? It's whatever the feelings are. I see you are really, really upset about this. This meant a lot to you. This is very distressing. And can we kind of do a little bit of that kind of calming, kind of get the lid down kind of thing? So, you know, probably you're going to feel better. And can I help with that? Or do you need a little bit of time? And then after that, it's looking at maybe exploring those kinds of thoughts and starting to make these connections and evaluating the behavioral corner.
Yeah, I like to think of validation, I like to frame it as a bucket of water. When you're validating and a person feels heard, you're putting water in that bucket, and that allows you to be in this position when it is time to explore thoughts.
Glass is full or bucket is full as opposed to, yeah, half empty or empty.
Yeah, you can use that and you'll feel it puts you in a position where you can explore thoughts with the individual, where they're not going to get defensive, and it's going to be a successful and fruitful conversation.
Yeah, because I have seen people hang on for dear life to their thought that, you know, we could logically see was incorrect, faulty, way too general. You know, like a catastrophizing, it's always going to be this way, or it's terrible, horrible, awful, I can't cope kind of thing. But they will hang on to it for dear life if what it means to them is that they're being seen and heard for the impact that something's had on them or how much it means to them, right? Which is why you want to separate out those things, and why this is not you doing this ultimately for your kiddos. This is hopefully you're being able to kind of model and get them to be able to start to use this kind of intervention and thinking kind of with themselves, right? So we don't want to be reinforcing kind of that glomming on to the mistaken belief or the less helpful thought or the erroneous thought. We want to really be going for validating the emotions so that we can make that connection and they can feel seen and heard, even if that's by themselves. Sometimes that's the case, right? And then move on to these other pieces.
Yeah, because all three pieces are entirely interconnected. With the goal is for kiddos to acknowledge and use these pieces themselves.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Randy, if we might get some of our parents here to think of a situation that maybe has occurred or might occur with your child that you know of that we could use to, and it can be generic, general. You don't have to kind of, you know, put in private details and out your kids' business, but give us an example of some kind that we could kind of work through using this kind of chart that Randy's got here and sort of put this into practice. Or if you want, it could be a situation of your own.
And one of the great things about this practice is it can really apply to almost any situation, because any situation, we're going to be able to see one of the three things. We're going to be able to see that in practice.
Mhm.
Generally, we'll see the feelings or the feelings or desire or behaviors piece and kind of work backwards in that way. But it does provide a useful framework for pretty much any situation that we want a different desired behavior for.
Mhm. Let's see. Okay. What about a child who doesn't want to do math because they think they can't get it? So they're just convinced. So at home, that probably looks like, I don't want to enroll in the class. I don't want to do my homework. There's no point. I'm just kind of never going to get it. What's, you know, why bother? What's the use there? So we've got a whole bunch of kind of thoughts going on.
Yeah.
With a lot of tears and frustration.
All right. So we have the situation of not wanting to do math.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine, yep. So we work through that. And then we've got another one about just making a decision where somebody just shuts down and can't make the decision and just leaves the answers blank on assignments. she gets super anxious about it. And so that's almost like kind of, I can't complete something, right? It's like, I don't know the right answer and that kind of thing. So there's also, we can
This is
work through that.
that's a really common one I'll see in
Okay.
school almost all the time. It's one of the more salient cyclical cognitive cycles that I see. So without inability to make decisions. So that's kind of the behavior, right? We avoid making decisions. So that's the behavior we see.
And I think sometimes it's decisions, it's also that with this making answers on assignments or tests, that it's the, I can't put the answer, I can't make the answer, right? So it's not a decision, it's an action maybe sometimes. I just can't do the action. I shut down.
So
It's a behavior.
yeah, so then we have two parts of the cognitive triangle. And we know that a thought is always going to precede that feeling. As humans, our brains are always synapsing. We always have thoughts going through our heads. So it could be worth validating that I understand it's really hard making decisions, a lot of implications on things, and it's difficult. So
Yeah. And I see the anxiety. So you might even comment with that, like sometimes I'm thinking, say, wow, I really see like, you're breathing really fast and maybe you're sweating and you're antsy and you just like, you look like you feel really, really anxious. And kind of like with a little bit of a question, and then you get the yes, I do kind of thing. And it seems like it's connected to this, answering the question on the assignment or making this decision about this, moving forward. It sure is. Wow. Let's kind of explore a little bit. First, take a couple deep breaths, calm down. Then kind of, can we come back and like explore, what do you think is kind of going on, in terms of your thinking with this? What kind of a thought might be there?
Yeah.
Randy, can you take it from there then about kind of where might you go with the student?
Yeah, absolutely. So after the regulation piece, ask what thoughts are kind of going on. Like, it seems that you are successful in school. Like, why do you think it's difficult to complete this? And depending on what the answer might be, it might be something along the lines of, I don't want to get it wrong.
I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah. So then the next step there would be exploring that thought. We have a great starting place there with exploring that thought. And it could be letting that thought play out. What happens if you get this wrong? So I'll get a bad grade on the assignment and keep challenging that. Is that okay? Like, what will the teacher say? And keep letting that thought run out, because we know that if they get a question wrong on their homework, if their homework is wrong, it's okay. It is not going to be the end all and be all of their education. They're not going to fail out, and it might feel like they're going to fail the class, and they might say that, and just continuing to explore it and letting it run to fruition. And again, that could work with the Socratic questioning piece. Like, what if your friend got a question wrong on their homework? What would you say? And it wouldn't be a big deal.
Well, and what would you believe about that? Would you think that if your friend got a bad grade on an assignment or got an answer wrong and didn't even necessarily get a bad grade, or didn't have the whole essay figured out when they first started, kind of thing, do you think that means then that they're not going to get into college, that they're not going to be able to have a good life, that they're not going to be able to like have a meaningful job? And they'd be like, well, no, I don't think so. But it kind of seems like that's sort of maybe what's happening in your mind, is that you are kind of projecting out into the future and thinking that this small piece here means complete disaster kind of down there, kind of. So sometimes exploring is kind of a conversation like that.
Absolutely. And with that, I would in addition to the thought coming to fruition, I would kind of talk about the cycle and what happens if the cycle comes to fruition. This thought seems like it's the one that's creating anxiety. And when you avoid making decisions, what does that cause?
Anxiety.
Anxiety, right? And this whole thing becomes cyclical. So nothing's going to change if there isn't intervention somewhere on the cycle, right? That's called the cycle of avoidance. It's avoiding making decisions. The decisions are giving us anxiety, and avoiding making that decision is actually reinforced because it makes us feel good that we didn't make a decision that causes anxiety. But it is maladaptive because it continues to facilitate the cycle. So we continue, we continue to explore that thought and challenge where we can until we get to, and this might be an ongoing process, a more helpful thought. And that could be, if I get this, if I do this assignment, I'll do okay. And we can make a whole nother cycle with a more helpful thought. And that's what
I wonder if I said, it's okay if I get an answer wrong.
Yeah.
And where could we go from there, Randy?
Yeah, it's okay if I get an answer wrong. What feeling does that elicit? Do we feel okay with that? And they'll probably say, I feel okay. I feel content right now. That's okay. And what behavior is that going to give us? That's going to be finishing the assignment. And then we create that new cycle for that. Finish the assignment. It's okay if I get one wrong. Feel content, finishing assignment. And then we reinforce that cycle.
Yeah.
So we can, and then when that's completed, we can use that as a wonderful piece for Socratic questioning in the future. And
we have something here, a bit of a challenge that I want to see what you do with this. So
yes.
One parent says that they have the opposite problem with their child who says, I don't care if I fail. And what is happening with the behavior is not doing the homework. So there's not doing homework. And then there's a thought there that says, I don't care if I fail.
Okay.
Well, maybe know kind of what the feeling piece of this might be. Parent, any guesses on that? What might be those kind of emotions or feelings? Oh, we're waiting on that, Randy. Imagine that. And if you had a kid who came in and said, you know,
yeah,
I don't care if I fail. And I mean, they've been maybe referred to you because they aren't, doing any of their work and turning it in, but you don't know about the feelings. Where are you going to go with that if that child walks into your office?
So we have that situation. We have the thought that I don't care about failing.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one piece. We have the I don't care. And that I see that might be apathy.
Mm-hmm.
And the result is failing. So what I would do here is I would start asking about future plans. I would start challenging this behavior to what a desired behavior might be. As in, okay, I'd really explore what failing looks like. I'd explore this behavior piece.
So looking at those consequences, evaluating the consequences.
Yep, absolutely. Evaluating the consequences. And future plans might be, I would hope I'd get something like they want a career, they want happiness, or even further, they just want a life, something. And I would use that as the new piece, as the launching point for the new triangle.
Okay, so then you're going to start your new triangle and you're going to have a behavior.
Yes.
Yes. So, and the behavior is reaching, a future goal of going to school, having a job, being independent, other kinds of things like that. Yes.
Yeah, and I would discuss positive opposites of what is happening in this current. The opposite of failing is passing. In the future, the opposite of having a job and having a career is nothing, is having no career, no job. And that doesn't sound like that would be the desired outcome for the individual.
So we've kind of brought a little bit of kind of that helping a child to look at, rather than getting into a power struggle over it, right? About you need to do the work because I, your parent, am concerned that you're going to do exactly that, not have the, the foundation on which you can
Yeah.
kind of build a meaningful life. Doesn't have to have particular certain things as markers of success, but a meaningful life for you, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes our fear and concern for our children gets us into that. This is a way of helping them to say, well, think this through a little bit. What is it that you kind of see down the road? And you could do it in kind of 6 months, a year, maybe when you're grown, all that. What do you see that you're kind of wanting? And it might take a little bit of work there. And I think if you found that somebody was kind of so stuck in the apathy and the kind of hopelessness around it, that's maybe when you want to reach out and have somebody else come alongside, whether it's Randy or one of the behavioral health support specialists at school, or the school counselor, or a therapist, if somebody's super, super stuck in that. And you can't kind of help them to shift, right? That would be kind of a time for that. But trying a little bit of that, helping them to generate sort of their hopes, and then seeing, does their behavior advance that goal? Kind of doing that evaluation, or does it sort of, is the consequence of their behavior meaning not going to happen, right? And then I think the I don't care, you could explore there as well, I think, right? Where it's like, sometimes, like I do this, like I don't say like you think this, but I say sometimes when people say I don't care, what they sometimes are thinking underneath that or believe is I can't do it, or they're feeling really overwhelmed or helpless. I don't know if that's for sure kind of what's going on for you. I don't know. Did any of that kind of ring a bell? And they may say yes or no, but they did hear me say it. And so now they have some additional kinds of thoughts that they can kind of look at. And then you could even go on to think, well, if I had those kinds of thoughts and beliefs, or if somebody did, I think, I don't know, what do you think they might be feeling? And if they're still kind of like, oh, I'll talk about this, you'd be like, oh, I don't know. I think I might feel hopeless, stuck, embarrassed, wouldn't want anybody to know that was going on with me. And that would feel really painful and icky. And oh man, and my heart would kind of go out to you. And wonder if we looked at that, I don't think I can do it kind of thing, and change that from I don't care. And then we kind of go, we can look at what's the evidence, which I heard kind of Randy saying earlier, and help them think through that. What's their evidence for that? And also, I think the idea that the past doesn't have to determine kind of the future, right? That in the present, there's always that opportunity for shifting things so that the future looks different. But we can sort of work to kind of inject some hopeful or more helpful thoughts, and then kind of explore how that might change those feelings there. And at the same time, we're coming into a place of, rather than that, oh, why can't you just do something? This is like, to having a more kind of empathic and kind of alongside advocacy kind of position with our child, which is likely to, while difficult sometimes to achieve, is likely to be more helpful, right? I mean, that's kind of one of our more helpfuls. We could diagram that out with, because our thought as parent might be, if my child doesn't get this class taken care of and get good grades and do their homework, and it's like they're going to keep on doing that, and they're going to do that all the way through middle school, high school, college, then their life is, I'm not going to have helped them to kind of become independent and functional. And then our feelings are going to be frustration and fear and anxiety. And then our behavior is probably going to be like, we're going to have lots of conflicts with our child, and we're going to push them, or we're going to it's going to be a break in our relationship and all of that. So sometimes we could maybe use this ourselves to think about what's a more helpful thought or belief I might adopt here? And how is that going to change my emotional state? And how is that going to help me in terms of having some more effective behaviors?
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
adding, I don't know if this specific situation, but this is something
Mhm.
I've seen in response to COVID.
Oh,
Especially
interesting.
coming out of COVID, the response of becoming withdrawn is a natural, it's a coping skill for this incredibly significant event and reintegrating into society. And that gives us a lot more to explore here in the thought section.
It does. And especially like if I think if you were to share that, if it seemed like that was a possibility, because I'm thinking I actually know quite a few young people, including my own nephew, who is otherwise and has again returned to being, a pretty good and active student. But when they had remote learning,
Mhm.
he could not cope with that. He shut down, he wouldn't get on his video, wouldn't and his parents were kind of fit to be tied about that. And but approaching it that like, hey, lots of young people and adults, when their work or their school changed this way, found that very, very difficult and overwhelming. And it wasn't satisfying to them. And they found they had challenges learning that way. And maybe they're making a conclusion that I just can't do it. And then I don't care, right? To be defensive about kind of hide my feelings kind of statement to me. And do we really think all of these people? It's like, no, it was like during COVID and remote learning, I experienced these things. Now it's changing. It's hard to kind of shift back, but maybe I can change back. Maybe it can get better.
Yeah.
I feel a little more hopeful, a little less stuck. And we don't want to say that, and Randy, you could maybe think about kind of different levels of kind of struggles that kids have, right? I mean,
Yeah.
some, I'm sure it's like, you talk this through in one situation and they're like, oh, I got this, and instant transformation. And I am quite sure that there are many others that it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So it's an incredibly ongoing process and pretty much identifying all of this. So all of this takes a lot of practice to identify. One of the most helpful ways that I find and kind of utilize this cycle is actually identifying feelings. That's our body's most significant cue, right? When something is amiss, we have feelings that result in bodily sensations, and identifying that is a really helpful way to kind of start the cycle. So we do a lot of emotional identification and checking in with yourself and having someone check in with you. A practice that I found very, very helpful is, it seems a little rudimentary with some of my kiddos, but feelings thermometers are a great tool. Kind of having a child rate how they're feeling. And if they rate the feeling high, then we can give coping skills before it kind of results in this maladaptive behavior. And then that also helps you explore some thoughts when that feeling or rate have a high feelings rating. Then we can then they can identify what thoughts have preceded that.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about that as kind of like the importance of emotions 101, where if we're somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time thinking about and naming emotions, and there's that whole kind of name it to tame it, which I think, that's great language for little guys, but it really sort of continues to apply, right, moving forward. So I think it is like, I start sometimes with this mad, sad, glad, scared, and just sort of in general kind of emotions kind of fall into that. And emotions have kind of their kind of little tiny bit of glad is content. And a lot of glad is ecstatic. And then a little mad is irritated, and very mad is, enraged, and kind of working with in different times and places, right? Exploring kind of those gradations and talking about those and saying, ooh, kind of what emotion do you think that was? And depending on your age of your child, right? So you kind of have to figure where to start that. And then it's like, where in the body would you feel that? Well, when I feel mad, I get hot and my fists are clenched, kind of thing. So again, it's kind of exploring that. So we're helping to build some fluency around emotions, not just because we want everybody to just stay in an emotional state all the time. That's why I think this is why I really like the CBT model. And it's not like it explains everything or it can be used for everything, but it's because it brings in that capacity to integrate kind of our thinking process, our feelings and emotions, and then the actual behaviors that we're doing and how we're impacting ourselves and others with those behaviors. And that it gives us those different access points. So whether it's starting to talk around the feelings and doing the validation, or if it's like you have a pretty intellectual person who's like, going to really resonate to the thinking, or if it's somebody who's like, well, I just want to kind of logically figure out kind of the pros and cons here and that, and how can I change that? There's a question here, Randy, about how can we initiate this conversation with our kids? And I'm wondering, by that, are you meaning this whole kind of part of the process of talking about thoughts, feelings, action? Or are you talking more about kind of the emotional piece and kind of what kinds of feelings and helping them name the feelings? I think.
Yeah, so I can answer both those.
Both of those?
Well, wonderful thing about this is you can initiate the conversation fairly easily because you are observing something. This gives you have a starting point to initiate a conversation. If you are seeing maladaptive behaviors, if you're seeing them in an angry state or avoiding work, you can always examine what's been preceding that. What feeling are you having? Or if they're having a feeling, what thought are you having? You always have a point to start at. You're always observing something.
Okay. So it's maybe doing the observation part first and maybe keeping that as concrete as possible. So I can think like back to that about the anxious avoidance, the anxious avoidance of answering the questions and doing the homework piece, where there's kind of like, wringing of hands and, just all stirred up and that kind of thing. Maybe just saying, wow, I noticed that you can't sit still and you seem to be like, practically hyperventilating and just really, really like, is this anxiety, anxious? Is that kind of what it is? Or what kind of name would you put to that? And I just really see that. It seems like that's really strong. And that being a starting point. And then you can go, what's that related to? And kind of what's your thinking around this? Or it could be, I see that you are not completing your homework this week.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering kind of like, kind of what's going on with that. I mean, that's what I observe the behavior, but I also kind of know that with behavior, there's emotions and thoughts that are involved as well. And so I'm wondering, could we kind of look at sort of what might be going on there? Because it seems to be really uncomfortable for you. It doesn't seem to be kind of really what you most want to have happening here. And then what about if the child then gives, they don't answer, or they give very short answers?
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things where this validation piece is so important in this. It really helps give answers if they do feel heard, if they know that what they're saying is relevant, if it has value. So validating that piece and putting them in a space where they feel comfortable to share and kind of explore that. And again, that's where if they're feeling emotional, it's that regulation piece, that validation piece, and just getting them in a place where they can explore this for themselves. Again, with the feelings thermometer and the emotional identification piece, it helps having that an ongoing process so they can kind of acknowledge for themselves when they're in that space and when they can talk about it.
Right, right. I think one of the things that I often think about with both parents and even kind of with therapists is modeling. So rather than kind of asking a lot of questions and expecting kind of answers, it's either creating situations where the exploration kind of fits naturally, or even saying, oh, I went to this talk and they were talking about thoughts, feelings, and actions and how they all kind of go together. And the other day, I found that really helpful because I got really upset about something, or I did something and then I had all these feelings about it. And I realized I was having these really negative thoughts that really weren't true, and that I was catastrophizing or I was doing this. And once I realized that, I kind of said, oh, I had to give myself a break. I think I'm going to think about this like, well, I made a mistake. People make mistakes. I can learn from my mistakes. I started to feel a lot more hopeful and kind of calm when I thought that. And then I realized that, then I kind of went for a walk, and that really kind of helped then to kind of sort of do a reset. And so I'm thinking kind of next time that's maybe going to play out differently for me. And it depends on your kids. I mean, sometimes you have to use the fewer words, the better. So you might think that through a bit, but sometimes it's more like I'm sharing my experience, or it's tackling one part at a time. Like when there's a natural kind of example of something, and maybe you're watching a movie or your child's telling you about a friend of theirs or about a situation or something like that. But I think it does start with that listening, validate, help them to name kind of the feelings. And sometimes, again, that's like wondering out loud. And I was having a conversation earlier this evening at work with a therapist who had a 10-year-old who was like, I think had done something that they felt pretty badly about, and they had just kind of gone into total shutdown mode about it. And it was sort of that idea about like, well, I can't get them to talk or to do something. And then I feel like I'm kind of pressuring them, and trying to like elicit it. And I think it's a way that as parents, we often can feel. And thinking about shifting that up to, I say sometimes I just go into that, I don't know, I could be really wrong, but sometimes when things like that happen to people, one of the things that they can feel is really embarrassed. Or they may have the thought that I'm a bad person. And I wonder if something like that might be going on for you. And if they don't respond, they could say, and I say, and you could tell me if I'm just way off base, because I might be. And that's okay. And then sometimes they answer and sometimes they don't. But what I know is that I've introduced the thought and the notion. So they can do something with that, whereas before they may not have had that thought or that notion. So it's just kind of slipping it in there. And it's like anything else. The more you practice it, the more, facility you get with it. And so it's just you kind of thinking about where can you introduce that. And I did give Valerie some sheets for, there's a list of kind of cognitive distortions, or about like kind of catastrophizing, other kinds of things like that, that maybe you could use kind of for a reference. And then there were some couple of good ones for using with young children. And I always feel those are super accessible. And I use those to kind of then think about, okay, well, how can I kind of use that as my foundation and then grow that to be more age appropriate. That's easier sometimes than going the other direction with something that's very complex and intellectual, and then bringing it back down to the simpler. So
Yeah.
She says she'll include that in the follow-up attachments. Yeah.
I also like using lists and definitions with your example specifically, and going off what you said, use an example of having thought that I'm a bad kid, I would maybe have them make a list of qualities that do make a good kid. And so we can kind of,
And then say, I don't know, do you think you meet any of these? No, well, gosh, I would say met at least 3 of these. What would Aunt Sarah say? What would your teacher say? Kind of, yeah.
and
Bring back to the beginning, and I'll just kind of maybe wrap up on this. And thank you so much, Randy, for your illustrations and kind of giving us a peek at how you might work this through with kids and giving that model to the parents. But is introducing flexibility, right? When we get rigid about anything, we're kind of in trouble. And so that first thing, just like if it's your lid is flipped, you want to get it down. If things are rigid, you want to see where you can get some flexibility and relaxation back in there, and then proceed with kind of this validating the feelings, exploring thoughts, and then evaluating kind of the behavior's impact. And I think we'll stop there and give it back to Val, because I'm sure she has some things to say in closing. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Hope that was helpful.
thank you so much, everyone, for coming to the parent chat.
Thank you, both of you, for joining us and for walking through examples of how we can work with our kids and ourselves, actually. I know that your focus was on kids for the most part tonight, but I sure know that there are a lot of times where I've personally had unhelpful thoughts.
Oh, yes.
Along the thoughts along the lines of, oh my God, my child is never going to graduate from high school because they will not do whatever they're supposed to do, in my mind. And being able to challenge that myself is really helpful. So thank you again for joining us. Before we sign off, I wanted to let you know, if you could, as always, Sherry asks us to put something in parent chat that you took away from tonight's discussion that can help you with your parenting. So if you would take a moment and put something in the chat for that, that would be awesome. We have a couple more announcements, which is next parent chat on April 5th is going to be, it sounds like a scary topic, but honestly, as a parent, this is one of the most important topics you can attend, which is asking about suicide, what caregivers need to know. And we have Megan Reibel of Forefront Suicide Prevention, which is a program that started out of the University of Washington, who will be here talking about this and giving and using a question and answer format to help us become comfortable. And I'll just add a personal note, which is something I never thought I would ever have to ask. And it's an incredibly difficult question to ask a child. And if it may not be your child, it may be your child's friend who is looking at your family as a safe place to talk about this or to show behaviors. So I encourage you to attend this parent chat for your family, but also for others that your family interacts with. And that is April 5th, same time, 7 to 8 p.m. here. Other than that, thank you so much. And we will be sending out a follow-up email that has resources in it and has links and to the materials that Christy provided. Thank you again, Randy. It's always great hearing from someone who is hands-on with kids. And Christy, thank you as always for bringing some new ways to parent to us, or some new ways to think about it.
You're welcome. Good night.
And thank you all for attending, and have an awesome rest of your evening.